He was the ultimate 90s straight sex symbol. He was a closeted gay man dying of AIDS. Kenny Greene wrote platinum love anthems for millions of women while hiding a lethal reality. His entire life was a profitable lie. He sang about pure devotion on stage, then hid in the terrified down-low underground. The second AIDS lesions ruined his marketable face. His record label threw him away. When his gay secret finally broke, his family refused to even claim his corpse. The voice of global romance died a diseased, abandoned outcast. Kenny Greene was born on January 17, 1969, in Detroit, Michigan. The city during the late 1960s and 1970s was an industrial center experiencing significant demographic and economic shifts. While the commercial recording industry, specifically Motown Records, had heavily influenced the city's international reputation, the foundational training ground for local musicians remained the Black church. Greene was raised in a family embedded in this religious infrastructure. His early life revolved around church attendance and participation in gospel choirs. The gospel choir functioned as a rigorous, informal vocal academy. Singers did not rely on sheet music. They were trained entirely by ear. Greene learned the mechanics of complex vocal harmony, pitch control, and breath management through mandatory repetitive rehearsals. He studied how to arrange multiple vocal parts, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, and how to lead a congregation through direct, forceful vocal delivery. This technical proficiency, acquired before his teenage years, formed the complete architecture of his later career in mainstream rhythm and blues. The religious environment provided Greene with advanced musical education, but it also established rigid behavioral mandates. The theological doctrine of conservative Black churches in the 1970s maintained strict prohibitions regarding sexuality. Homosexuality was classified definitively as a sin. The social consequences of violating this doctrine were severe, often resulting in immediate ostracization from the congregation and permanent alienation from the family unit. The church served as the central social safety net for these communities. Being expelled meant total social isolation. Greene recognized his differing sexual orientation at an early age. Confronted with the absolute rules of his family and his community, he made a calculated decision to suppress this information. He constructed an outward persona that aligned with the expectations of his environment. He participated in the church and developed his musical talent while systematically hiding his private reality. This was a necessary survival mechanism to avoid rejection by his immediate relatives. He learned early that his environment demanded a division between his public behavior and his private identity. In 1987, at the age of 18, Greene enlisted in the United States Army. The military in the late 1980s provided a direct route to economic stability, employment, and distance from his hometown. Greene was stationed at a military installation in South Carolina. He entered an institution governed by strict hierarchies, physical discipline, and uniform regulations. The Department of Defense at that time enforced a blanket ban on homosexual service members. This was several years prior to the implementation of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Under Department of Defense Directive 1332.14, homosexuality was deemed entirely incompatible with military service. The military police actively investigated suspicions of homosexual behavior. Discovery routinely resulted in immediate administrative separation, often categorized as a less than honorable discharge. Such a discharge stripped service members of their veteran benefits and severely hindered future civilian employment. Greene was therefore placed in an environment of constant surveillance. The military barracks was a confined, hyper-masculine space where any deviation from expected behavioral norms drew immediate scrutiny. Greene applied the concealment tactics he had developed during his childhood in the church to his daily life in the military. He maintained absolute secrecy regarding his orientation, navigating the rigid social structure of the Army without drawing suspicion. This period functioned as an intensive exercise in compartmentalization. During his off-duty hours, Greene utilized the recreational facilities on the base to maintain his musical skills. He played piano in the barracks and arranged impromptu vocal performances. In this setting, he met Clinton Wyke, a fellow soldier known as Buddy. Wyke possessed a strong vocal capability and shared Greene's specific interest in contemporary R&B and vocal harmony groups. Greene and Wyke began a structured collaboration. They spent their available free time analyzing the chord progressions and vocal arrangements of successful recording artists. They formed an early vocal trio with another enlisted soldier named Nelson. Greene took the role of the primary musical director, structuring their harmonies and selecting their material. They secured permission to perform at various events on the military base and at local venues in the surrounding South Carolina area. These early performances provided Greene with practical experience in leading a group, managing rehearsals, and arranging vocals for a live audience outside of a church setting. Recognizing their potential for a professional career, Greene and Wyke decided to terminate their military service. They navigated the administrative process to secure early discharges from the Army. They returned to civilian life and relocated, shifting their focus entirely to entering the commercial music industry. They required a third vocalist to complete their intended harmonic structure. Through industry networking, they located Jeff Sanders, a singer operating in Brooklyn, New York. Sanders was integrated into the group, finalizing the three-part vocal lineup. They adopted the name Intro. The trio possessed technical vocal proficiency, disciplined rehearsal habits acquired in the military, and a clear understanding of the contemporary market. Greene stepped into his role as the lead singer and primary songwriter. He was prepared to enter the professional entertainment sector, bringing with him exceptional musical capability and a deeply ingrained psychological conditioning to hide his true identity at all costs. Greene, Wyke, and Sanders established their operational base in New York City in 1990. At that time, New York functioned as the undisputed corporate and creative epicenter of the American rhythm and blues industry. The transition from the structured environment of the military to the unregulated, highly competitive music sector required immediate adaptation. Intro did not secure a recording contract upon arrival. They entered the industry at the lowest operational tier, beginning a multi-year period defined by financial instability, continuous auditioning, and the systematic recording of demonstration tapes. The recording process in 1990 was technologically restrictive and financially demanding. Digital recording software was not yet the industry standard. Artists relied on analog tape, which was expensive and required renting professional studio space by the hour. To fund these sessions, the members of Intro worked standard civilian jobs. Greene directed the group's limited financial resources strictly toward securing studio time during off-peak late-night hours. During these sessions, he acted as the primary vocal arranger and engineer. He utilized Tascam multi-track recorders to layer their three-part harmonies, meticulously constructing the sonic profile that would eventually define their commercial sound. He focused on precision, applying the rigorous vocal discipline acquired in his gospel background to contemporary secular rhythms. This period of independent operation served as Greene's primary exposure to the internal mechanics of the major label system. While shopping their demo cassettes to various artist and repertoire departments across Manhattan, Greene observed a rigid, heavily standardized corporate structure. The late 1980s and early 1990s marked a specific transitional phase in commercial black music. The polished, synthesizer-heavy sound of New Jack Swing, pioneered by producers like Teddy Riley, was beginning to merge with the aggressive aesthetic of hip-hop. Labels such as Uptown Records and LaFace Records were establishing the new commercial blueprint. Greene studied this blueprint clinically. He noted that major recording labels functioned as highly risk-averse corporate entities. A&R executives were not simply looking for vocal talent. They were sourcing specific marketable archetypes. For a male R&B group to secure financial backing, they had to conform entirely to a demographic-tested visual and behavioral standard. The industry demanded an aggressive, street-oriented masculinity. Male vocalists were styled in heavy combat boots, oversized athletic wear, and dark sunglasses. They were instructed to project a brooding, hyper-heterosexual persona. The marketing strategy was direct. Package male singers as rugged, unattainable romantic ideals for a primary consumer base of young women. Greene watched A&R representatives actively reject or repackage artists who failed to project this specific brand of alpha male energy. The corporate mandates were clear. Any deviation from the established masculine standard was viewed as a financial liability. A group perceived as soft, vulnerable, or ambiguous would not receive radio promotion or music video funding. Greene processed this information strategically. Having already spent his formative years and his military service perfecting the ability to conceal his bisexuality, he recognized that the commercial music industry required the exact same survival mechanism. The stakes were simply financial rather than disciplinary. He understood that his physical presentation and public demeanor had to align flawlessly with the label's demographic requirements. Rather than relying solely on vocal performance to secure a contract, Greene altered his approach. He recognized that vocalists were easily replaceable within the label system, but songwriters held permanent leverage. He began to focus obsessively on songwriting and production. He analyzed the structural components of contemporary Billboard hits, studying the specific chord progressions, lyrical phrasing, and tempo variations that successfully transitioned a song from R and B radio to mainstream pop syndication. By establishing himself as the primary writer of Intro's material, he ensured that he controlled the group's intellectual property. This tactical shift transformed him from a disposable singer into an indispensable asset. If a label wanted the songs, they had to sign the group on Greene's terms. The execution of this strategy culminated in a specific pivotal performance. By the early 1990s, the Red Zone, a prominent nightclub located on West 54th Street in Manhattan, served as an unofficial proving ground for unsigned talent. Industry executives, established artists, and prominent disc jockeys frequented the venue to monitor emerging trends. Greene secured a performance slot for Intro at the club. He recognized this as a direct opportunity to bypass the standard, highly guarded A and R submission process. Intro delivered a tightly arranged, highly disciplined vocal set. Their performance lacked the elaborate choreography standard for the era, relying entirely on the precision of their harmonies and the strength of Greene's original compositions. The strategy was effective. The performance was witnessed by Dwight Heavy D. Myers, a commercially dominant rapper, and his production partner, Eddie Farrell, known professionally as DJ Eddie F. Myers, and Farrell operated Untouchables Entertainment, an independent production and management company with significant industry leverage. Heavy D and DJ Eddie F. immediately recognized the commercial viability of Intro's vocal arrangement and, critically, the strength of Greene's songwriting. They bypassed the standard developmental phases and offered Intro a management contract with Untouchables Entertainment. This partnership provided Greene with immediate access to the highest tiers of the industry. Untouchables Entertainment utilized their established corporate relationships to secure a formal recording contract for Intro with Atlantic Records, a major global distributor. The years of navigating the lower tiers of the New York studio system had concluded. Greene had successfully maneuvered his group into a major label contract by providing exactly what the corporate structure demanded: a marketable masculine visual package backed by undeniable radio-ready songwriting. He had learned the rigid rules of the R&B industry and adapted to them flawlessly. However, the contract with Atlantic Records codified his public persona. The facade he had maintained for survival was now a legally binding, commercially monetized asset. The management agreement with Untouchables Entertainment and the subsequent contract with Atlantic Records immediately transitioned Intro from independent status to the highest tier of commercial music production. In 1993, Atlantic Records released Intro's self-titled debut album. The project was engineered to exploit the specific alpha male aesthetic Greene had meticulously observed during his early years navigating the New York studio circuit. Instead of leaving their success to chance, the album served as a highly calculated structural blueprint of contemporary R&B, driven entirely by the precision of Greene's songwriting and vocal arrangements. The commercial response was rapid and quantifiable. The album's lead singles rapidly dominated the Billboard R&B charts. Love Thang, Let Me Be the One, and the heavily rotated Come Inside established Intro as a dominant force in the R&B landscape. The album officially achieved gold certification from the Recording Industry Association of America, confirming its status as a high-yield financial asset for Atlantic Records. Greene was the designated frontman, performing the primary vocal runs and serving as the focal point of the group's music videos and live television appearances. However, Greene's professional utility extended far beyond his role in Intro. Simultaneous to the development of his own group, he was actively restructuring the broader sound of 1990s R&B. In 1992, prior to Intro's debut, Untouchables Entertainment assigned Greene to collaborate with an emerging, untested vocalist named Mary J. Blige. Blige was recording her debut album, What's the 411, a project designed to fuse traditional soul vocals with the abrasive percussion of hip-hop. Greene co-wrote two of the album's most critical tracks, Reminisce and Love No Limit. These compositions were not standard pop songs. They were foundational texts for a new subgenre classified as hip-hop soul. The tracks provided Blige with the precise melodic structure needed to bridge the gap between urban radio and mainstream pop syndication. The massive commercial success of What's the 411 elevated Greene from a competent group member to an elite industry architect. In 1993, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers formally recognized his structural influence. He was awarded the ASCAP Rhythm and Soul Award for Songwriter of the Year, sharing the honor with producer Dave Jam Hall. Greene was now operating as a highly sought-after commodity, subsequently contracted to write and produce for established and emerging acts including Will Smith, Tyrese, 98 Degrees, Cameron, and Tevin Campbell. Yet as Greene's industry leverage peaked, his personal confinement became absolute. The R&B market of 1993 and 1994, dominated by groups like Jodeci, Boyz II Men, and Shay, operated on a strict, unyielding visual and behavioral mandate. Male vocalists were marketed exclusively as heterosexual romantic figures. The promotional apparatus of Atlantic Records demanded that the members of Intro project a specific brand of accessible, street-oriented masculinity. Music videos were cast with female models portraying romantic interests. Photo shoots required the group to wear unbuttoned shirts and leather jackets projecting an aggressive, brooding sexuality directed entirely at female consumers. Greene was required to embody this archetype continuously. The financial stability of his group, his management team, and his label depended on his ability to maintain the illusion of the heterosexual R&B frontman. Because the industry standard equated homosexuality with commercial failure, Greene instituted a policy of total operational security regarding his bisexuality. He maintained this strict division even within his own group. Biographers and industry contemporaries confirm that Greene never disclosed his sexual orientation to his bandmates Clinton White and Jeff Sanders. He recognized that the risk of the information leaking either accidentally or intentionally was too high. To manage his private life while subjected to the intense public scrutiny of a touring musician, Greene operated within the parameters of the down-low culture. In the 1990s, the DL functioned as an underground network for black men who engaged in same-sex relationships but publicly identified as heterosexual. The culture was born out of strict necessity, operating in the shadows of an entertainment industry and a broader societal framework that offered no safe harbor for openly gay or bisexual black men. Navigating the DL required rigorous logistical planning. Greene completely avoided established gay bars or public spaces associated with the LGBTQ+ community, aware that a single photograph or rumor could instantly terminate his recording contracts. Communication within this underground network relied heavily on alphanumeric pagers and coded language. While on tour, the routine was highly regimented. After public appearances, meet and greets with female fans, and industry after parties, Greene would wait until his bandmates and management staff had retired for the evening. Only then Under the cover of absolute secrecy, would he arrange discreet encounters at specific hotels. The industry itself was passively complicit in maintaining these facades. Historical accounts of the 1990s R&B sector indicate that it was standard operating procedure for labels and management firms to arrange female companions for artists during red carpet events and award shows. These women, often models or industry associates, functioned as visual shields, confirming the artist's heterosexual credentials for the press and the public. Greene participated in this system, utilizing the provided framework to further camouflage his reality. This required a constant, exhausting state of hypervigilance. Greene was executing a complex psychological operation daily. He possessed the profound empathy and observational skills necessary to write lyrics that articulated the deepest emotional vulnerabilities of women, skills that made his songs massive commercial successes. Yet the moment he stepped away from the mixing board, he was forced to shut down that vulnerability completely. He was celebrated globally for his ability to communicate intimacy through his music, but he was strictly prohibited from experiencing open intimacy in his own life. His commercial output was authentic, but the physical existence required to sustain it was entirely fabricated. The environment in which Greene operated was fundamentally defined by the HIV/AIDS epidemic. By the time Intro achieved mainstream commercial success in 1993, the virus had been a known entity for over a decade. However, the societal understanding and governmental response to the disease created an atmosphere of profound terror, misinformation, and intense stigmatization, particularly for Black men. The initial public health response in the United States during the 1980s framed the virus almost exclusively as a pathogen affecting the white, openly gay male population in major urban centers. Early media reports utilized the term GRID, cementing an immediate, culturally pervasive link between the disease and homosexuality. The federal government's delayed acknowledgement of the crisis allowed fear to dictate public perception. By the time the terminology shifted to HIV and AIDS, the disease was already deeply stigmatized as a moral failing rather than a standard medical emergency. A diagnosis was widely viewed by the general public not just as a terminal medical sentence, but as a definitive, highly public confirmation of sexual orientation. As the decade transitioned into the 1990s, the epidemiological reality of the virus shifted significantly. While infection rates among white gay men began to stabilize due to aggressive community-led health initiatives and safe sex education campaigns within openly LGBTQ+ networks, the virus was accelerating rapidly within Black and Latino communities. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported substantial increases in infection rates among Black Americans during this period. This demographic shift was driven by a complex matrix of systemic factors: historical disparities in healthcare access, higher rates of poverty, and a lack of culturally specific public health messaging. Within the Black community, this public health crisis intersected directly with the strict religious conservatism that had shaped Greene's childhood. Many traditional Black institutions, particularly the church, struggled to address the epidemic objectively. The theological doctrine that condemned homosexuality frequently extended to the disease itself. In numerous congregations, HIV/AIDS was implicitly or explicitly framed as divine retribution. This response effectively silenced open dialogue, regarding sexual health. The stigma was so severe that families frequently concealed the true cause of death of their relatives, attributing AIDS-related mortality to cancer or pneumonia to avoid community ostracization. For a bisexual man like Kenny Greene, this environment constructed an inescapable psychological trap. He was navigating a commercial industry that demanded absolute heterosexuality while existing within a broader cultural framework that equated his hidden orientation with a lethal, highly stigmatized contagion. This underground network, built on absolute anonymity to protect careers, became an exceptionally high-risk environment. The strict secrecy that shielded his public image effectively neutralized any possibility of safe-sex dialogue or health communication. Within these clandestine networks, discussions regarding HIV status or the implementation of safe-sex practices were exceedingly rare, as such conversations required a level of vulnerability and admission that the DL structure fundamentally prohibited. The secrecy that protected Greene's recording contracts and his relationship with his family simultaneously exposed him to extreme medical vulnerability. The closet provided professional safety, but created a blind spot regarding physical health. The corporate music industry compounded this pressure. Major recording labels operated as risk-averse financial institutions. An artist's value was determined by their ability to maintain a rigorous schedule of touring, recording, and promotional appearances. Health complications of any kind were viewed as financial liabilities. The specific stigma surrounding HIV/AIDS in the early 1990s meant that even a rumor of infection could instantly terminate an artist's career. Corporate public relations departments were not equipped to manage the narrative of an R&B sex symbol contracting a disease associated with homosexuality. If an artist's status became known, radio stations would drop their singles, corporate sponsorships would be revoked, and the label would immediately cease promotional funding to protect their own brand association. Greene was operating at the apex of this high-stress environment. Between 1993 and 1995, his professional responsibilities were immense. He was lead vocalist for a charting group, a primary producer for Atlantic Records, and a contracted songwriter delivering hits for other major artists. His daily schedule consisted of extended studio sessions, cross-country flights, and demanding press junkets. He was required to project the image of a virile, untroubled R&B star. Internally, he carried the ambient, constant terror of the era. He watched the news reports detailing the rising mortality rates. He witnessed the physical decline of individuals within the broader entertainment sector. Furthermore, the medical reality of HIV in 1994 offered very little hope. This was the period prior to the widespread availability of highly active antiretroviral therapy, which was introduced in 1996 and eventually transformed HIV into a manageable chronic condition. In the early to mid-1990s, the available treatments, such as early high-dose AZT regimens, were frequently toxic and largely ineffective at halting the progression of the virus. The physical markers of the disease, severe wasting syndrome, chronic fatigue, and visible lesions, were well known to the public. Greene understood that if he were to contract the virus, it would not remain a private medical matter. The disease would eventually manifest physically, stripping away the camouflage he had spent his entire life building, and exposing his truth to his family, his group members, and the global public simultaneously. This was the specific historical shadow under which Kenny Greene produced his most celebrated work. The immense pressure of maintaining his professional output while navigating the lethal realities of the underground network required a level of psychological endurance that is difficult to quantify. He was constructing the soundtrack for a generation's romantic lives, while entirely isolated by the epidemiological and cultural terrors of his own era. The strain of this compartmentalization was unsustainable, setting the stage for the physical and professional collapse that would follow. For an artist functioning under the severe psychological constraints of a concealed identity, the recording studio serves a dual purpose. It is the primary site of commercial labor, but it also functions as an isolated, secure environment for emotional release. Throughout the mid-1990s, the vocal booth was the only space where Kenny Greene was permitted to express vulnerability without immediate social or professional repercussion. A clinical analysis of Greene's songwriting catalog during this period reveals a complex architecture. His compositions functioned on two distinct frequencies. On the surface, they were meticulously engineered commercial R and B tracks designed to fulfill the romantic fantasies of a female demographic. However, beneath this required commercial veneer, musicologists and lyrical analysts suggest that his most significant works operated as coded confessions, utilizing standard pop tropes to articulate the specific isolation and longing of a closeted life. The R&B genre has historically relied heavily on narratives of forbidden romance, secret rendezvous, and agonizing unrequited love. These established thematic conventions provided Greene with the perfect camouflage. He frequently wrote about the necessity of hiding a relationship from public view, the pain of loving someone who could not fully commit, or the desperate need to escape societal judgment. For the mainstream consumer, these lyrics described standard heterosexual infidelity or complicated dating dynamics. For Greene, however, the language of sneaking around and forbidden love mirrored the exact logistical and emotional reality of navigating the underground down-low network. He was able to broadcast his specific psychological pain to millions of listeners, hiding the truth in plain sight by utilizing the universally accepted vocabulary of the love song. This methodology extended to his vocal arrangements and production techniques. Greene's primary musical foundation was the Black church, and he consistently integrated the structural elements of gospel music into his secular recordings. Gospel music is fundamentally designed to express spiritual yearning and the desperate plea for salvation or relief from earthly suffering. Greene utilized these exact vocal techniques, extended melisma, strained upper register sustained notes, and the aggressive stacking of minor key harmonies to communicate a profound sense of desperation. In the studio, Greene frequently recorded all the background vocal parts himself, layering his voice dozens of times to create the effect of a massive, echoing choir. This production technique not only showcased his technical proficiency, but practically resulted in a sonic environment where Greene was entirely surrounded by his own voice. It was an auditory manifestation of his total isolation. Even within a three-man group, the defining emotional labor was executed entirely alone. Greene's ability to channel hidden pain through music was not limited to his work with intro. It was arguably most evident in his songwriting for female artists. By writing for vocalists like Mary J. Blige, Greene found surrogate voices. The music industry allowed female R&B artists a much wider emotional spectrum than their male counterparts. Women were permitted and commercially encouraged to express raw heartbreak, emotional devastation, and deep insecurity. Greene utilized these female artists as proxies. He provided the lyrical framework and melodic structure for tracks like Blige's Reminisce, pouring his own suppressed emotional volatility into songs that a female vocalist could deliver without violating the industry's gendered expectations. The raw, unpolished pain that defined the early hip-hop soul movement was deeply informed by Greene's own psychological reality. He was the silent architect of a sound built on emotional distress. The delicate balance between commercial expectation and personal expression began to fracture during the development of Intro's sophomore album, New Life, released in 1995. The context surrounding this project was significantly different from their debut. During the album's production, Greene's father passed away. This personal loss triggered a profound shift in Greene's creative direction. The grief, compounded by the escalating hidden stress of his private life and the looming shadow of the public health crisis, manifested directly in the new material. Greene actively moved away from the formulaic, highly sexualized, upbeat tracks that had defined their first album. Instead, he steered Intro towards somber, introspective themes dealing with mortality, existential dread, spiritual exhaustion, and the desire for emotional renewal. The lead singles and deep cuts on New Life lack the aggressive, club-oriented tempo that the market increasingly demanded. The lyrical content was dense and heavily reliant on gospel-infused melancholy. This creative pivot generated immediate friction with Atlantic Records. The corporate infrastructure of a major label relies on predictability. Atlantic's artist and repertoire department had successfully marketed Intro as a specific commodity, rugged, romantic R&B sex symbols. They expected a replication of the debut album's formula to ensure a predictable return on their financial investment. Greene's delivery of an album steeped in grief and emotional fatigue was viewed not as artistic evolution, but as a breach of their commercial brand. The label's response reflected the standard industry reaction toward any asset deviating from its assigned commercial lane. Promotional support for New Life was noticeably downscaled compared to the aggressive, high-budget campaign backing their debut. The marketing department floundered, entirely unequipped to sell an album steeped in grief to a consumer base conditioned for club-ready hits. Radio programmers, pivoting toward faster synthesizer-driven tracks, firmly resisted placing the heavier, gospel-infused songs into daily rotation. Consequently, while critics praised New Life for its sophisticated vocal arrangements and emotional gravity, the project failed to achieve the necessary commercial velocity or match the gold certification of their initial release. This sudden financial underperformance fundamentally fractured Greene's standing at Atlantic Records. The commercial music sector operates on a brutal hierarchy dictated entirely by recent quarterly earnings. By failing to replicate the massive sales data of the debut album, Greene instantly lost the operational leverage he had acquired as a hit-making producer. The executives who had previously deferred to his creative direction now subjected his entire workflow to intense scrutiny. They issued a direct, unyielding directive: suppress the personal introspection and immediately resurrect the hyper-masculine illusion. The label demanded a strict, immediate return to the profitable, heavily stylized alpha male aesthetic that initially secured their financial backing, stripping Greene of his creative autonomy. This corporate mandate forced Greene into a corner. The music, which had previously served as his primary coping mechanism and his only secure outlet for emotional expression, was now being actively policed by his employers. He was instructed to stop writing about his actual internal state and to return to manufacturing the fabricated romantic persona. This suppression of his creative outlet coincided directly with the escalation of his private crisis. Stripped of the ability to process his emotional reality through his songwriting, and strictly prohibited from discussing it openly with his bandmates or management, the psychological strain became absolute. The architecture of his double life, previously held together by his immense musical output, began to buckle under the combined weight of corporate demands, profound personal isolation, and a rapidly approaching biological reality. The human body, when subjected to chronic, sustained psychological stress, experiences a documented suppression of the immune system. For an individual already carrying the human immunodeficiency virus, this environmental stress acts as a biological accelerator. By the late 1990s, Kenny Greene had spent nearly a decade operating under extreme duress. The exhaustion of maintaining a grueling commercial recording schedule, combined with the constant hypervigilance required to conceal his orientation within the down-low network, began to exact a definitive physical toll. The virus, which had remained entirely hidden, began its progression. The physical reality of his condition became impossible to ignore when a significant lesion developed on Greene's ankle. Associates and biographers report that the growth eventually reached the size of a tennis ball. Medical professionals identified the mass as Kaposi's sarcoma. This specific type of cancer causes lesions in the soft tissues and was, throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the most recognized visible physical marker of advanced AIDS. For Greene, this diagnosis represented his absolute worst fear materializing. The disease was no longer an invisible internal threat. It was now a visible anomaly that directly threatened the visual perfection required of his public persona. The diagnosis triggered a profound psychological collapse. Rather than seeking aggressive medical intervention, Greene retreated into absolute denial. This response was heavily informed by the media landscape of the era. The late 1990s was a period dominated by aggressive tabloid journalism, where the private medical records of public figures were frequently commodified. Greene adamantly refused to seek treatment at a Veterans Affairs hospital, despite being entitled to care due to his military service. He operated under the intense paranoia that medical personnel would inevitably leak his diagnosis to the tabloid press. He calculated that the risk of public exposure and the subsequent destruction of his career and family relationships was a more immediate threat than the cancer itself. To manage the visible evidence of his declining health, Greene constructed an elaborate network of fabrications. He informed his bandmates, management, and family that the massive swelling on his ankle was the result of a severe sprain sustained during physical activity. When his overall health continued to deteriorate, exhibiting symptoms consistent with advanced immune deficiency, he attempted to shift the narrative entirely. He fabricated a story blaming a former female partner for transmitting an unspecified, non-lethal illness to him. This specific lie was a desperate, calculated attempt to simultaneously explain his physical decline while actively reinforcing his required heterosexual image. The psychological burden of this denial severely strained his interpersonal relationships, particularly within his group. Clinton Buddy Wyke, observing his friend's rapid deterioration and recognizing the physical markers of the epidemic, attempted to intervene. According to accounts from Greene's inner circle, Wyke purchased educational literature regarding HIV management, along with boxes of condoms, and brought them directly to Greene's residence. Rather than accepting the intervention, Greene reacted with intense hostility. Paralyzed by the terror of his reality being vocalized, he reportedly destroyed the materials in a fit of rage. Tragically, this state of absolute denial was so entrenched that, for a brief subsequent period, Greene reportedly continued to engage in unsafe practices, unable to accept the reality of his own medical status. As the decade closed, his physical deterioration accelerated and became increasingly difficult to camouflage. He suffered from severe, rapid weight loss, a condition medically classified as HIV wasting syndrome. He lacked the energy to complete standard promotional tasks, constantly attributing his profound exhaustion to recurring, severe bouts of the flu. In a desperate attempt to manipulate his appearance and conceal the sickly pallor of his skin and the thinning of his hair, Greene made a drastic aesthetic change. He bleached his hair bright blonde, hoping the dramatic color shift would distract observers from his facial emaciation. However, this personal attempt at camouflage conflicted directly with the strict visual mandates of his recording contract. Intro's management and the executives at Atlantic Records immediately intervened. They were not focused on the underlying medical crisis prompting the change. They were focused entirely on the disruption of the established brand. The label mandated that he immediately dye his hair back to black. His physical appearance was a corporate asset, and he was contractually obligated to maintain the specific rugged demographic profile that had proven commercially viable, regardless of his actual physical condition. This incident marked a turning point in Greene's relationship with the corporate infrastructure. Following the commercial underperformance of the New Life album, the label was already hesitant, as Greene's physical frailty became undeniable, making him a liability for the rigorous demands of touring and music video production. The executives began to distance the company from him. Atlantic Records quietly and indefinitely suspended the production of Intro's planned third album. There was no formal press release or public explanation. The financial backing simply evaporated. The industry systematically utilized minor professional infractions to justify this marginalization. The breaking point occurred during a scheduled radio promotion. Greene arrived at the studio severely fatigued, wearing dark sunglasses indoors to hide his physical state, and kept his head down throughout the engagement. The stress and exhaustion culminated in a verbal altercation with the hosting disc jockey. In a healthy artist with high commercial momentum, such an incident would have been managed quietly by public relations personnel. For Greene, whose commercial leverage had waned and whose health was clearly failing, the label seized upon the altercation. They used the incident as formal justification to suspend his promotional activities entirely, effectively ending his tenure as a frontline artist. By the year 2000, Greene had been largely pushed out of the industry he had helped define. His final documented contribution to a major commercial release occurred in early 2001. Operating far below his previous status as a lead producer and songwriter, he was brought in to provide uncredited backing vocals for Tyrese Gibson's track For Always. He delivered the intricate vocal arrangements that had made him famous, but his physical capacity was nearly exhausted. Once the recording session concluded, the industry, having extracted the final measure of his technical capability, discarded him entirely. He was left to face the final stages of his illness without the financial support, healthcare infrastructure, or professional protection of the corporate machine he had served for a decade. By the summer of 2001, Kenny Greene was entirely confined to his residence, his physical condition having deteriorated beyond the capacity for any public appearance or professional engagement. The corporate music apparatus that had dictated his daily schedule for a decade was entirely absent. The virus had systematically dismantled his immune system, and he was facing the terminal stages of the disease. In this state of absolute physical confinement, stripped of his recording contracts, his public image, and his industry leverage, Greene made a calculated decision to dismantle the silence that had defined his entire adult life. In July of 2001, he initiated contact with Jamie Foster Brown, the publisher and primary journalist of Sister to Sister magazine. The selection of this specific publication was deliberate and strategic. Sister to Sister functioned as a highly trusted, deeply entrenched media outlet within the Black community. It bypassed the mainstream, predominantly white tabloid infrastructure, offering Greene a direct, unfiltered line of communication to the exact demographic that consumed his music and, crucially, the specific community that harbored the intense stigmas he had spent his life evading. He was not seeking a sensationalized mainstream expose. He was delivering a final address to his own cultural sphere. The resulting interview was conducted via telephone from his bed. In a profound departure from the carefully guarded, heavily scrutinized press junkets of his peak career, Greene spoke with stark clinical honesty. He formally dismantled the two primary pillars of his public facade. First, he explicitly confirmed his bisexuality, shattering the hypermasculine heterosexual R&B archetype he had been contractually obligated to maintain. Second, he confirmed that he was in the final stages of AIDS, directly refuting the years of fabricated illnesses and minor injuries he had utilized as cover stories. During the interview, his tone was reported as physically weak but psychologically resolute. He articulated a deep, profound regret regarding his previous state of denial. He admitted that his paralyzing fear of public exposure and tabloid scandal had prevented him from seeking early medical intervention, specifically avoiding the Veterans Affairs healthcare system that could have potentially extended his life. He transformed his personal tragedy into a direct public health warning. He utilized the platform to address the down-low culture directly, urging individuals operating within those clandestine networks to seek immediate medical testing and to implement rigorous safe sex practices. This confession Delivered at a time when the stigma surrounding HIV/AIDS in the Black community was still at a devastating peak, stands as an act of immense historical courage. It was the only time in his public life where his voice was entirely his own, unbound by corporate mandates or demographic algorithms. The aftermath of the publication brought no miraculous physical recovery, nor did it bridge the immense chasm between Greene and his family. The final months of his life were characterized by profound isolation. The bustling entourage of management personnel, label executives, and promotional models that had surrounded him for years had completely vanished. The responsibility of his daily care fell entirely to Clinton Buddy Wyke. Wyke maintained a constant presence at Greene's residence, managing his meals, coordinating his basic needs, and providing the only consistent human contact during the agonizing final stages of the illness. Conversely, Jeff Sanders, the third member of Intro, was largely absent during this period. Associates close to the group indicate that Sanders was deeply traumatized by the rapid and severe physical deterioration of his colleague, finding the reality of the situation emotionally insurmountable. On October 1st, 2001, Kenny Greene died in New York City. He was 32 years old. The immediate logistical requirements following his passing exposed the ultimate devastating consequence of the cultural and religious dogmas that had forced him into hiding. The memorial service was arranged at Redden's funeral home, located on West 14th Street in Manhattan. Funerals for prominent R and B figures of that era were typically large-scale events, heavily attended by industry executives, fellow artists, and extended families. Greene's service was a stark contrast. The defining characteristic of the memorial was the absolute and complete absence of his immediate family. Not a single biological relative traveled from Detroit to attend the service. The intersection of strict religious conservatism, the deep-rooted homophobia within his community of origin, and the intense, paralyzing stigma associated with an AIDS-related death resulted in total familial abandonment. The relatives who had nurtured his early musical talent in the church choir chose to entirely sever their ties rather than associate themselves with the public reality of his life and death. The shame dictated by their social environment proved stronger than familial obligation. Consequently, the burden of claiming his remains, arranging the memorial service, and covering the financial costs of the burial fell entirely to his chosen family, his bandmates, his studio collaborators, and a small circle of industry peers. They were the ones who stood in the Manhattan funeral home, acknowledging the profound injustice of his final isolation. Following the civilian memorial, Greene's remains were transported to Calverton National Cemetery on Long Island. Because of his honorable service in the United States Army prior to his music career, he was entitled to a military burial. He was interred with formal military honors. There is a profound, somber irony in the logistics of his final resting place. The very military institution that had initially forced him into strict concealment by threatening administrative discharge for his sexuality ultimately provided him with a dignified burial, while the family that had raised him provided nothing. The death of Kenny Greene resulted in the immediate and permanent cessation of Intro as a recording entity. Buddy Wyke was emotionally devastated by the loss of his collaborative partner and close friend. He entered a prolonged period of professional withdrawal, refusing numerous industry offers to replace Greene with a new lead vocalist and continue touring under the group's established name. Weig maintained that the architectural sound of Intro was inextricably linked to Greene's specific vocal arrangements and songwriting capabilities, and any attempt to replicate it would be a violation of his legacy. The group's catalog was frozen in time. Over 2 decades have passed since his death. The corporate machinery that extracted his talent and subsequently marginalized him has evolved, and the specific public health terror of the 1990s AIDS epidemic has transitioned into a managed chronic care model. Yet Greene's musical output remains a permanent fixture in the American R&B canon. His compositions continue to generate royalties, secure placements in film and television, and receive consistent rotation on classic soul radio formats. However, historical distance permanently alters the context of these recordings. When modern audiences engage with the catalog of Intro or the foundational tracks Greene constructed for Mary J. Blige and others, the listening experience is no longer strictly commercial. The smooth, meticulously arranged love songs, once marketed as straightforward romantic anthems for an oblivious public, now reveal their true structural purpose. They stand as the only surviving authentic documents of a man who was trapped within an unforgiving historical era. The soaring vocal runs and desperate lyrics were not mere studio techniques. They were the coded, desperate communications of an artist who possessed an unparalleled ability to articulate love, yet was systematically denied the fundamental human right to live it openly. Kenny Greene's legacy is secured not just in the platinum certifications of his records, but in the enduring quiet tragedy of the silence that surrounded them.